I want to introduce Mary Palkovich. Mary's an energy industry consultant and retired senior executive with over 30 years of experience in the natural gas and electric utility engineering, leadership, and operations. Mary works with energy industry leaders to deploy pipeline safety management systems and to sponsor testimony on technical matters in rate proceedings. Mary is a decisive, energetic leader who has worked for Xcel Energy, Southwest Gas, Consumers Energy, CenterPoint Energy, and Panhandle Eastern Pipeline, which is now part of Energy Transfer. In 2019 and 2020, Mary was appointed to serve on the Federal Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee, which we talked about earlier, which is the GPTC. Mary was appointed to serve on the Federal Gas Pipeline Advisory, the GPAC, by the U.S. Secretary of Transportation to ensure effective pipeline safety regulations. Mary is currently serving on the board of directors of Heath. She just recently came on. And I personally know Mary through a good portion of her career and have a lot of respect for Mary and Mary's knowledge of the industry. So with that, we'll have Mary Palkovich.
Thanks, Paul. It was great because all of the speakers this morning have touched on some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. So I was very appreciative of that. One of the things that Paul just talked about, I'm going to touch on a little bit, and it is the difference between a compliance mindset and a safety mindset. And to be smug and be with a public utility, you're getting recovery for all of your expenditures and you're earning 10% on every dollar you put in the ground, to sit there smug to a regulator and say, I comply. Well, what Paul talked a lot about was this business district. Hey, I don't have to leak survey around that Costco until another building is there. That is a mindset that sat in the public utility space until I would say about 5 years ago, and it is shifting. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I've been in rooms with Patty Poppy, who is the CEO of PG&E. I reported to her directly to her for 5 years. I've been in strategy meetings with the CEO of Consumers Energy, Bob Frenzel. I work for Xcel Energy now on a consulting basis. These CEOs are all wrestling with, how do I get my 10,000 employee corporation to think differently and to think about risks and not about compliance and not just about the almighty dollar? Because the dollar will follow. If a public utility is making its money and the investors and the shareholders and the stock price is holding, and they're darlings in the community because the guys are up on the pole and they're fixing the wires and they're down in the basements and they're fixing the leaks and they're out in the street and they're the good guys. They come to the rescue, you know, when the gas doesn't go out during a storm usually, but when the wires are down. So this whole mindset, they're all really struggling to get their arms around it. And I'll talk a little bit about how they're going after it. A little bit about me. Paul talked, but a couple pieces for some of you in the room. You know, I did grow up in Michigan. I went to Michigan Tech, that is way up inside Lake Superior. My freshman year, 1978-79, we had 398 inches of snow fall on campus. So picture 398, and to this day, there hasn't been a recorded winter with more snowfall than that. And so we had a lot of fun with that. There's a huge thermometer up there. If you've ever been, you can see it. And I was there, I got a civil engineering degree. And then I took a job with a company called Panhandle Eastern, and I was out in Denver, Colorado. And why did I take that job? Because I wanted to ski. And I wanted to be in Denver, and it was really cool back then. And it was 1982, and Denver and Boulder weren't together yet. They were completely separate, and so you'd take the half-hour drive from Denver and go up to Boulder and party. And party in 1982 was way different than party is today. I mean, literally, I'm not kidding. You'd go to a bar, and you'd see people snorting coke on the bar top table. That's what was going on in Denver in 1982. I didn't participate, but that's what was happening. And then I did take a board governance class for women. My experience throughout that, when I was in Colorado, I learned multiple things because my first training, I'm a 22-year-old woman and I look like this, except a lot younger. And the tough roughnecks out there were having fun with me, you know what I'm saying? And so I learned how to inspect pipelines. And one of the things that rung true to me now is, this lead inspector that was training me, his name was Heath Musgrove. He was from Oklahoma, and he was tough. He opened the trunk of his car, and there was one of those big jugs of Black Jack Daniels. And he took a snort right before we were going to go out and walk this pipeline. That's 1982, 83, that's how it was. And he said, and he had a huge belly, which was fine, but what he had to do to get and inspect the pipeline was you had to get underneath to make sure that the coating was wrapped perfectly, because if you missed part of the coating, then you've got a source of corrosion, and then you're going to have a leak and a problem. So he took a golf club and a rear view mirror and he duct taped it, and he'd walk along the pipeline like that with the mirror, and he'd look in the mirror and he'd effectively look for breaks in the tape and coating dings and things like that. And he turns and he looks at me and he takes this mirror on the end of this golf club and he goes, "Good thing you're not wearing a skirt." And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 22 years old and I'm like, God, what is going on out here? That's what it was back then, and that was some of my experience and learnings, okay? Then I took a transfer to Kansas City, go Chiefs, woo, woo, woo. And I did FERC filing, so filed capacity plans to the federal government, a lot of engineering, a lot of analysis, things like that. And then I transferred to Minneapolis in a totally different job. My husband was getting a transfer. The company that I was working for in Kansas City, Panhandle, was moving to Houston. I was pregnant. We said, well, let's do the Minneapolis thing. We had family up there. So I transferred up there and I learned distribution from transmission. And this was interesting because when you're living in a transmission pipeline world for a transmission pipeline company, you talk about capacity in terms of daily. How much throughput per day. So I go to this distribution company and we were measuring gas by hour. And so it was just this interesting transition from measuring by hour. But distribution is death by 1,000 paper cuts, It is so much. When you have an incident in transmission, it's huge and it's a big deal. But there are so many distribution incidents that happen all along the way, and I learned a lot there. And then I went to CenterPoint Energy when they purchased Minigasco. And throughout my career, I ended up, the last part of my career at CenterPoint, I was vice president of engineering, and I was in the Houston office. I lived in Minneapolis, but I flew back and forth. And one story I like to tell about that experience was one of my first responsibilities was you need to get all 6 states in which we operate onto one operations manual. Okay, because Minigasco had its manual, and Arkansas had its manual, and Louisiana had its manual. And that was a tall order. So you take the toughest guy down in Louisiana who has to deal with hurricanes, and when a hurricane comes into Louisiana and it blows houses down, then gas meters, and then the riser off the gas meter is blowing gas all over. So he has to deal with those kinds of issues. Whereas the director of operations up in Minnesota has refrigerator-sized ice blocks falling off of houses and crushing meters, and then the riser's blowing gas, right? So I'm trying to get these two guys that hate each other from Louisiana to get on the same page with the guy from Minnesota to get to one standard operating procedure. So throughout that whole process, in the end, those two guys became best friends because they drank beer and got to talking about issues. And so the evolution here that I'm trying to describe is that in corporations, it's about efficiency and it's about gain and getting things together and standardizing procedures. And even back then, that's what was a lot of the focus. Then I took a position with Consumers Energy out of Michigan, kind of going back home. My parents were in their 80s. They were relatively healthy, but I kind of felt the need to sort of be closer to them, and I'm really glad I did, because within 2 or 3 years after I moved there, they did pass away. Point being here is that at Consumers, this is where I learned a lot about standard operating procedures. You know, if I've dropped Patty's name a couple of times now, but Patty was instituting at Consumers, and Garrick is still doing that there. The lean operating system, you may have heard of, like visual management, standard operating procedures. She brought that playbook and took it to PG&E a couple of years ago when she left Consumers and went out there. So I learned a lot about that. And that plays into this pipeline safety management system that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. The other thing, I'm on the board of Heath. I'll talk about that in a minute. And I'm also on the board of Common Ground Alliance. They are all about preventing damages. Many of you in here that are dealing with line locating, even leak detection too, but are about preventing damages. Fact is that the #1 cause of leaks in the United States and in Canada on distribution pipe is third-party damage. Undisputable fact, it's on all the DOT reports, everybody knows it. So all utilities are chasing, preventing damages. Common Ground Alliance, that's what they do, that's the association. I sail on Lake Michigan. I like to snow ski in the winter, golf, fitness, travel. 3 grandkids, 4th in the oven. There'll be 3 boys and 1 girl when we're done with that. So events drive policy and policy drives law. Paul talked a lot about this, so I'm not going to go too deep, but we've got a transmission integrity law that we all follow. That came after the San Bruno incident and the Marshall, Michigan incident, where in Marshall, Michigan, Enbridge, God love them, their controllers were up in Canada. They saw pressure dropping on a pipeline near the Kalamazoo River in Michigan. And how they reacted to that was they jacked the pressure, pumping it more. Well, what they didn't know was it was leaking oil into the river. It was a very horrific incident. And anyway, so that turned into the TIMP law. The distribution integrity management rule that we all are obligated to follow is basically the premise there is to know your system and manage your risks. That's been in place for over 10 years now. Everybody has kind of pretty much got it down, wouldn't you say, Paul? It's sort of in the DNA of all the utilities. Aliso Canyon was a California leak that happened, and that turned into the storage integrity management rule. We talked about LDAR, and I want to talk a little bit about ESG. That's on the next slide. Merrimack Valley, that was an incident that resulted in the safety of gas distribution pipelines that Paul talked about. We talked about the infrastructure bill and hydrogen hub projects. I want to talk about that. When we talk about what investor-owned utilities are doing, these alternative fuels like hydrogen hubs, the big, large combo utilities like Xcel Energy, PG&E, Con Ed, I think I met a Con Ed gentleman this morning. The gas and electric utilities, because we love gas, we like to say that the electric in those combo utilities dominate over gas. Why? Because usually their revenue at a company like that is 60 to 70% coming from their electric, and gas is like a smaller piece. That's just how it is. The margins are about the same. The states give 9 to 10% earning on the investment for whether it's gas or electric. You just have to go to the state and make your case that you're prudent and you're putting, proper investment into the ground. So the point in all of that is that hydrogen and these other different methods by which companies are trying to make environmental help and things, these like propane air and hydrogen and other fuels that go into the pipelines It's all being worked, and all of those public utilities are talking to each other about it. They're sharing. They're sharing these secrets and research. And I know Suzanne talked about it this morning, about all of the research across the industry about different kinds of fuels to put in the pipes that we've got in the ground. And then we talk about renewable natural gas. That's been around a long time. You drive by the landfill and you see the pipes hanging out on the top. We engineers don't like landfill gas because the BTU is inconsistent. So when it gets to the furnace, it doesn't behave properly. It gets to the water heater, it gets to the stove. It's not consistent. So we don't love landfill gas, but it is renewable and it's very green. So we're going to put it in. So just a little bit about that. So here's what the investor-owned utilities are doing, and I say that because there are gas companies that are small and family-owned still out there. There's not many of them left, I don't think, but they're still there. And there are municipal-owned gas companies, but the investor-owned are the ones that I want to talk about because they're the big ones, and that's where most of my career was. So ESG is not just, it's environmental, it's social, it's governance. I want to just bring up an example about what that is. So these utilities are in the communities. They care very much about their stock price because if they've got investors that are willing to invest, then they can put the money into the pipes to keep the value up, providing safety, and being in the communities and basically doing the right thing. But what's included in all of that is reducing the carbon footprint. We've heard a lot this morning about the environmental pressures. So what are they doing? Well, you'll go to any website of any large combo utility, and they have right on the front how they're eliminating coal-fired generation electric, right? Getting rid of it. They've got a timeline. The bigger ones have a longer timeline, but the pressure is there. Get it done sooner, faster. And what we love is they're usually converting to natural gas. So we love that because that increases our usage in our industry. What they're also doing is conservation. So maybe you've received a free light bulb at your house from your public utility, trying to get everybody to convert to the new light bulbs so that you can reduce. The states are allowing public utilities to earn on reducing usage. So it seems counterintuitive, but when you get stuff in your bill, either whether you pay electronically or not, but you see billboards and things about reducing usage and you see your utility, well, they're getting some recovery on the backside from the states because what the states understand is that the public utility is a necessity, it's a public necessity, and that they have to earn money. Because if they don't, then you've got issues with reliability, you've got issues with safety, and so the states understand this, the regulators get it. And so about conserving usage is a very big part of how utilities make their money. And then they negotiate those rates. So these investor relations, I just want to touch on that. Again, if you're interested in these things and you want to put money in, you go to a public utilities website and you can kind of see how they're earning their money. There's all kinds of investor relations things, information. The other thing that is happening is pipeline safety and grid modernization. Modernizing of the grid, going from analog to digital, they've kind of all been going after that. Most everyone's got a digital electric meter now, I think. If not, your utility's working on it, where you can find your usage by going online. Usually you're getting text alerts. If you haven't signed up for them, you probably can, to find out if your power is out, why did it go out? Usually the utility will send a text message and say, it was a varmint, meaning like a squirrel, climbed up and did something, or the wind blew it down, but all of this digitization is happening on the electric side. On the pipeline safety on the gas side, it's about risk reduction. It's about implementing pipeline safety management systems. I asked Paul that, was kind of like a feeder teaser question when he was up here. There are 10 elements in the pipeline safety management system that the utilities are implementing right now. It's about leadership commitment. It's about managing changes. It's about managing risks. It's about having control of your documentation and control of your record keeping and a constant pursuit of getting better. And so when the standard was put out, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Paul, something like that, the investor utilities aren't obligated by law to implement a pipeline safety management system, but they're doing it anyway. Why? Because we are one incident away from it being mandated, and that is the opinion of everybody in the boardroom of the big utilities. One more big incident, and then it's going to be mandated. Every 4 years, the feds get the chance to re-up the rules. And this is not a political comment I'm going to make right here, because I'm an independent, but when the Democrats are in, more rules get piled on. When the Republicans are in, not as much. And I say that because every 4 years, there's a chance to up the rules for the feds for the code. So what are the utilities doing? They're implementing pipeline safety management systems. There are 10 elements, I rattled them off. They're managing data, and they're taking their gas risks and putting them on the enterprise risk register. So periodically, I know at CenterPoint and at Consumers and at Excel, every quarter, senior leadership sits down and goes through all the risks across their company. One of the main risks they're all afraid of is natural gas, especially if they don't understand it. So they're afraid of it. They don't want an incident. No one wants the boom. And so they're implementing pipeline safety management systems. This is a methodical 10-element standard that has you managing documentation, risks, and really forces employees to follow standards. And it also requires, and this would be probably something relative to all the Heath and any line locators, is if an employee doesn't follow an operating procedure or a standard, that would be in non-compliance with what I'm talking about here. But it's more than that now. We want all those folks to tell you if the standard that they're being asked to follow isn't good enough. So it's going even deeper. And that's part of the expectation in this standard, is that you're in the constant pursuit of getting better. So why did I go to Heath? Besides the fact that I've known Paul for 30 years, and when I was 30 years old and supervising leak detection guys and trying out with a 17-pound flame ionization pack on my hip, Heath has a history of quality and customer service and innovation, and they're still doing it. You're going to hear all about that this afternoon and tomorrow. And I thought, well, I love the fact that it's a woman-owned business. That makes me happy. And it's known for quality. They have a penchant for innovation. And the other thing is Paul can, and all of the Heath, Drew as well, can articulate how their new equipment complies with the new laws. So it's in this constant pursuit of getting better. And I like that. And it's a data-driven organization. Drew's working on a lot of that and bringing things along. And I really think that this, the layers of protection and the comprehensive turnkey approach is the right way to go. So I was delighted when Carolyn asked me to join the board. On this slide that Paul went through, what I thought was really interesting was when you think about all these layers of protection, and you think about like a grade 3 leak that's out in the middle of a cornfield, if nobody's going to look at it and it's not causing any problem, it's still leaking, and it still could become a super emitter. And that's the new enemy now, is, nobody wants to have leaks that are super emitters. So I really think that Heath's got a handle on this, and I'm really super excited for the future. And then I just love the turnkey offering, guys. This is, you're gonna see more about that over the next day too. So that is all that I had. I am happy to answer any questions from anybody on any of the topics that I touched on.
You talked about the utilities get to earn 10% or 9%, and I agree with that, but that's not on O&M dollars. Those are just the pass-through. So typically, the utilities have maybe frowned on, well, that's money I got to spend that I just get back. So I don't know if, there's a thought on that, or it's just, to me, well, I've got to spend O&M dollars in order to invest in capital dollars.
Right.
It's a scale that I can't just
Right.
spend on the one side. So what are your thoughts on that?
I would love to opine on that one. So when you're in charge of engineering at these utilities, you're sitting with this huge pool of capital dollars, and everybody thinks you're king because you earn on that expense, right? And operating expenses you don't earn on. And so at a utility, if you've got to go chase a leak, it stays on operating expense. And if you repair it and it doesn't meet certain criteria to go capital, it's on operating expense. And everybody in the financial part of the utility is like, oh my God, they got to get our operating expenses down because we're not earning money on it. About 5 years ago when I was at Consumers, we needed to find $100 million out of our annual operating expense. $100 million we needed to cut to meet our targets, okay? Well, it used to be that you don't touch capital because you're earning on it. Well, that's not true, because the fat cats inside the utility, frankly, it's a mindset of waste if all you're doing is trying to spend capital money so you can earn on it. So about 5 years ago, leadership said, we're gonna go find $100 million and we don't care if it's capital or expense. And that was mind-boggling because there's a lot of waste in capital. And so to your point, yes, utilities can earn, they set their rates based on, 7 or 9 or 10%, but they're not earning on expenses. So the squeeze always, and those of you who are leak detecting or line locating for utilities, they're always squeezing you. They're always squeezing you because that's an operating expense. But if you find a leak and you can repair it and you can meet the capital criteria, you win both ways, because then you earn on your capital, but you're also taking care of the leak. So, yeah. Any other questions? What did I miss, Eric? Okay.
Yeah, so you're the second speaker to talk about excavation damage causing leaks.
Yeah.
But it seems like there's not a lot of regulatory energy towards damage prevention pursuant to leaks. Any reason why, you think?
I would say that there is, and I would love Paul to comment on that too. I would say that there is, but like when you dial 811, that was a regulatory thing that there's going to be a national center for calling in tickets, okay? Right now, there's a dilemma, and I would love to hear your comment on this and yours as well, because the states set the damage rules. It's not a federal standard. And at the last Common Ground Alliance board meeting, we talked about this. And for the feds to come out and say there's going to be a national standard for, response time and hand digging and all of that, it's going to take all these 50 states with all their different rules to come to one. And I would love to hear your comment on that.
Well, I know in Nevada we take damage prevention really seriously, and we've really driven our numbers down in part because, just some small things. We talked to the utility and we got rid of co-locating, meaning the gas utilities, their locators only locate gas. They're not doing telecom, water, and that really added a benefit because they're just gas. Another big one was, and this may sound weird, Southwest Gas emails us within 15 minutes of every excavation damage. And the email says, have an excavation damage, here's the cross street. That's all we know. So the fact that the utility is telling us about a damage that they could be at fault of and they don't know just goes to show they're serious about damage prevention, because we're allowed to bring enforcement cases against excavators and operators. And if you don't go out there in real time and get the data and talk to the guy and ask him why he did what he did, you've lost it. If you get a quarterly report at the end and you look at it, that guy's moved on. He's not going to even remember what it was.
Right.
So I think states do take it seriously, but the rules are different in every state. You know, one of the things that I hate is when people throw up their, well, look at my damage per 1,000 tickets. Okay, well, what's a ticket? Well, it's 14 days, no extensions. Okay, well, we have 28-day tickets and we allow 3 extensions. So you're getting 8 tickets to my 1 ticket. And every state is different in terms of whether there's a hand tool exemption or whatever. So it is tough.
Yeah, and one comment I would make is we had a perpetrator in Minnesota, and I mean that perpetrator, that was a known damager. And actually, I meant Michigan, not Minnesota. And this was an excavator. They put down blacktop, and they were big, and they knew how to lobby. And we were getting hit all the time. They were our #1 damager. So I went to the state fire marshal's office, and I went to the pipeline safety director, Dave Chislow, you might know him. And I said, Dave, you got to send a message to these guys. He goes, okay, fill out the form. So in Michigan, you could fill out a form, the utility could, but you have to be careful because you want to know you're going to get in. If you spank them too hard, then all of a sudden there's repercussions that can happen. They're going to tattle on you because we weren't perfect, so our house wasn't clean, and we're going to go rat fink on these guys. And we did. We said we just can't. And we told them in advance. We said we're going to go to the state and we're going to rat on you, and then you're going to get a fine. And sorry, but you're not paying attention anymore. So they did. They sent them. I mean, it was a hand slap. I think it was like $1,000, but you know, it wasn't a deterrent to that excavator to keep doing it, because $1,000 to them was like, shit, that's an hour of payroll or something. I don't know, but to your point, it's happening. It's just because it's not federal and it's managed all by the states, we don't get to see it as clearly, I think.
The big thing about it, so there are things that you can do.
Yeah.
You know,
but
the
here's the other
$1,000
thing.
isn't it? It's the reputation of the company.
Well, but here's the other thing. So the public works directors are sending out their contracts for next year's paving, right? Well, who are they going to pick? Least cost? Probably. Or are they going to pick the guy, you know, who's least cost that has been fined by the state for hitting utilities? You know, I'm probably going over time, but.
Comment real quick.
We wanted to hear from the federal regulator.
Yeah, so we have a relatively new regulation. It's 49 CFR 196. It's called Protection of Underground Pipelines from Excavation Activity. And the way that works was initially our state programs department, they're the ones that do a lot of the evaluations on the state programs for the grant funding and so forth. So they do an excavation enforcement program evaluation annually. Okay, so they did the initial one several years ago, and we had a number of states that were deemed inadequate. And inadequate are actually, I believe, the terms that are used in this regulation. If a state is deemed inadequate, then the federal government can come in if it involves excavation damage to a gas or liquid pipeline, and we can enforce our regulations, which are in this 49 CFR 196. They're different than the state regulations, definitions, some of the terminology and stuff, but at that point it becomes a federal action. And we have not done any in Southwest region states. You know, I'm based out of Houston, and basically that would be something I would have to be involved in, but there's some states, typically in the central and western region, notably Alaska and so forth, that I don't even think has a pipeline safety program. So the initial incentive was to get the states, and in And in this instance, several years ago when we were doing that, I think Oklahoma and so forth, they actually went to their state legislators and actually beefed up their laws in order to be changed from inadequate to adequate. So initially we had a number of states that were inadequate, and now we have like a handful. We've had one or two that went to adequate. Now they're back to inadequate because, you know, we look at it. If there's no enforcement taking place and there's excavation damages, then we'll change them to inadequate, and that affects their funding and also brings the prospect of some federal enforcement.
Yeah, and that's what we want. I mean, for those states that are inadequate and not doing the job, we need to have some safety net, so that's excellent. Yeah, one of the things I was going to mention when Paul was talking about the GPAC that I found very interesting, this is the Federal Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee, and it is where the reauthorization of pipeline safety, so there's a set of initiatives, and then what PHMSA and industry try to do at the GPAC is come together on language that's workable, okay? And I remember this one was fascinating because when Pennsylvania started getting a lot of gas gathering, what was it, 10 years ago or so, maybe a little bit more, the gas gathering there was very low pressure. And so some of the companies that were piping it were putting pipe above ground as a temporary interim basis because it was cheap to just connect things up. And they'd use, we would make fun of them and say they're using garden hose and band clamps and things like that and duct tape. But we were at the GPAC and they didn't want to be held accountable for leak detection. Do you remember this? This is when I was on the GPAC. And we, in representing the investor-owned utilities behind AGA, we said we can't support that. And they lost and they had to do leak survey, even when they had above ground low pressure piping at gas gathering, because there was a little hole in the rule that allowed them to get out of it. Anyway, it was just kind of an interesting thing. Like, how can you stand there and say you shouldn't leak detect when you've got pipe above ground carrying gas? It was really weird. Thank you.